Jeune Afrique. The objective of the barometer is to share the perception of African private sector leaders on key issues and challenges. As you can see on the screen, this year we had 194 participants to the survey. They come from more than 50 countries across Africa. This year, 1/3 of the CEOs were English-speaking leaders, and we also have almost 1/3, 30% exactly, with operations in at least 2 regions of Africa. So these leaders were asked 35 questions addressing the fundamental aspects of their business model in 5 fields. The first one being the strategy, the second one finance and governance, the third one innovation, the fourth one human capital, and sustainability. So if we go through each part of the survey, the good news, which is the good news of the day, is the return of confidence exceeding that of 2019, which was the pre-pandemic level, with 78% of the CEOs that are confident in the prospects of their industry and their company for 2022. So that's a great figure. We've been very impressed by that result. However, they remain cautious in their projections, aware of the acceleration of security risk, and in particular the cyber risk, with 46% of the CEOs that feel particularly concerned about the cyber risk. And the risk of inflation is becoming a major concern for African CEOs. Of course, the war in Ukraine poses new threats, with 58% of the CEOs that already testify to a very strong impact on the cost of their supplies. And as you can see on the right-hand part of the slide, to cope with that, 53% of the CEOs think they will either reduce or postpone some investments. And again, on the long run, the impact of inflation is a major source of unpredictability and concern. In terms of attractiveness, CEOs continue to place the business environment as the first criterion for investment and location. As you can see on the map, West Africa continues to be on top of the most attractive regions in Africa, with the 3rd time in a row Côte d'Ivoire being in the #1 position in terms of the most attractive country of Africa, and of course of West Africa. And 28% of the CEOs surveyed are considering making an investment in Western Africa. We also note this year the entry of Togo and Benin in the top 10. This is the first time. When it comes to financing and governance, the CEO think their financing capacity is generally preserved in the context that they are experiencing. But in this difficult context, they encourage the use of alternative fundings such as private equity, which is confirmed here, where we see that when it comes to the opening of the share capital, private equity, foreign companies and local companies are the most favored source of financing. Private equity being considered a value-creating partner with a win-win and a medium-term strategy. They are considering as not only providing capital, but having a positive influence on the strategy of the companies for a more sustainable growth. In terms of governance, we notice a strengthening of governance at a constant pace, driven by an increasing use of independent directors, and it is noticeable a commendable progress on gender parity. More than 75% of the CEO are committed to the independence of their board of directors, and in the current environment, the need for an agile and transparent body of governance is growing, and the CEOs are making it a top priority. On gender parity, although improvements are witnessed, there is still room for progress to bridge the gap with global levels on diversity. Innovation. Innovation is a strategic priority for African companies. 89% of the CEOs surveyed have developed an innovation strategy, either through the creation of an innovation committee or the appointment of an innovation leader. Clearly, Africa is consolidating its leadership in terms of digital payment innovation. And as you can see on the right-hand part of the slide, over the next 12 months, 80% of the innovation project will focus on digital payment, process automation, and artificial intelligence. More than ever, innovation is open and collaborative, with 49% of the project, the innovation project, that will involve partnership with incubators or startups. So these are new collaborative approaches between the public and the private sectors for more innovation. Human capital. The race for the best talent is more than ever critical for companies in Africa. Identification and attraction of talent, which was the #1 issue before, is now #2, as there is an increasing demand for talent development to retain the best employees. And to help companies maintain their attractiveness and competitiveness, companies are creating in-house universities and partnerships with training experts. Employee performance management policies are diversifying and getting closer to international standards. Equal pay, as you can see on the right-hand part of the slide, between men and women appears to be a strong asset to maximize women empowerment in African companies for 46% of the CEOs surveyed. So combined with diversity in the hiring process, equal pay, and gender diversity in the leadership team, clearly women empowerment is breaking the bias in 2022. Now, let's talk about sustainability. Sustainable development is clearly at the heart of the strategy of African companies, with 83% of the CEO surveyed that consider sustainability issues in their corporate strategy. They are doing this, they are demonstrating that this is clearly a new standard. And if African CEOs are committed to improve their ESG impact and transforming their companies into sustainable companies, it is because they are convinced that sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand. And finally, on sustainability, after 2 years of a global health crisis, and in the context of the release of the 6th assessment of the United Nations Panel on Climate Change, sustainability is more and more influenced by external factors, such as the regulatory obligations, as well as the stakeholders' expectations. So now, for African companies, The challenge in terms of sustainability is clearly to move from strategy to implementation and monitoring of sustainable commitments. Thank you very much for your attention, and now we can open for questions.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Really illuminating. Come take a seat with me. Let's get into the Q&A. Great to see you. I know a lot of work goes into these surveys. I'm going to ask one question as the audience starts to warm up and get your thoughts ready and to pose questions to Emmanuel. What shocked you or surprised you in some of these outcomes in terms of when you've last did the survey and what you're seeing at the moment?
There's clearly been an increase in the cost of supplies because of the consequences of the pandemic and the problems that has caused on the supply chain globally. And in addition to that, the cost of raw materials, of certain raw materials, has significantly increased over the last couple of months. And this flows into the cost of supplies.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think we've seen this trend emerging, and I find it fascinating that it's one of those big points of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have questions for Emmanuel that we could pose to him? We have roving mics standing by. Please raise your hand and introduce yourself. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Any questions? Nothing as yet. Okay, great. So that gives me an opportunity to ask the questions I want. I found it, let's start with the last slides on sustainability. And I think it's been one of those contentious issues. I think it's, the pandemic made us reflect a lot inwards about what we should be doing. I think with the new risks, there's always a big question about we're going to see that thinking, that strategy being derailed because of the global shocks that are emerging. But it sounds like it's still very much on African CEOs' agenda.
No, it's clearly a new standard. It is clearly a new standard and clearly a must-have. And as I just explained in the end of the presentation, the message we received from the CEOs is that they are convinced that sustainable development and profitability can go hand in hand. So there's no option. I mean, they must keep on moving on sustainability. The challenge for some of them is to move from strategy to implementation and monitoring of the progress they can make.
And I mean, I don't know if you ask these questions, but is it they're worried about the regulatory environment and they don't know what they should be doing to comply? Or, I think it's sort of how you read into, the metrics of, is this green, is it not, is it ESG, is it not?
Well, there are a few frameworks so that they can refer to, and in terms of monitoring, even if there is not, for the time being, a global standard that would reconcile everybody, because the US have one, Europe has one, etc., etc.
Fantastic. I'm just going to check with the audience. Do you guys have any questions at this point in time? Okay. The most exciting regions, and this actually quite surprised me, West Africa is sort of the go-to place right now. Could you tell me why?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
West Africa, so the most exciting, economic regions where CEOs are most excited about. Why is it West Africa?
I think primarily because of political stability, which these countries can enjoy. And in the case, for example, of Togo and Benin, for example, we have seen those two countries making significant progress years after years. And I think this is the result of a consistent strategy to attract foreign direct investment, and they have returned. I mean, they are starting to have return today.
Do you get a sense that there's any sense of alarm or urgency about the food insecurity situation right now? I know that, I know these surveys, don't reflect in real time today, but was there any sort of indication that that is becoming one of the worries about what the inflationary outlook is going to be?
Yes, they are really concerned about the risk of inflation that, for example, we have in Europe. And there is a risk of contamination to Africa. That's certain, and it's a major source of concern for the CEOs as well as of unpredictability. That's for sure. So this is something they're clearly monitoring.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back in time a little. So this is for 2022, and you've been involved in the survey in the past. How has thinking fundamentally changed or not changed on some of these metrics that has been quite interesting, you know, from the first edition and now to the third edition?
First, I would mention women empowerment. That's clear.
What's changed on that, do you think? Why?
Well, we have more and more women in the board of directors. We have more and more women in the leadership teams of African companies. So this is a long-term trend, but there are still a gap to close compared to European standards, for example. But they're making very significant progress, and this is something we are really measuring year after year. So that's one point. Another one would be the level of confidence. We did not expect, when we launched the survey, to reach that level of confidence to a level that is higher than the one we measured in 2019.
So confidence now is higher
Yes.
than what it was?
Yes, before the pandemic.
Before the pandemic?
Absolutely.
How?
Well, we believe there are two reasons for that. The first one is because the African economy was very resilient during the pandemic. I think there's been only 20 countries that enjoyed a GDP growth in 2021. And among those 20 countries, the majority of them were African countries. So the continent has been very resilient. That's one element which we believe can explain today's level of confidence. And the second element that we would like to point out is the fact that today, African companies feel better prepared to future crises than they were before the pandemic. They have implemented risk management protocols, risk management tools, and they really feel more confident to face future crises.
That's so encouraging, because I think that I think the rest of the world is feeling, you know, very risk averse right now, especially with what you're seeing on the geopolitical front, and we don't really know where we're going. But the African CEOs, and as you say, always resilient, always agile, and looking to the future. And it always strikes me, you know, that there's the most optimism is always on the continent. What do you think it has to do with? I know you were saying, you know, they've built resilience and they've got buffers and they're able to survive any big exogenous shock. But does the African Continental Free Trade Area have anything to do with it? Is it what policymakers are saying have anything to do with it?
For the moment, the CEO we surveyed do not anticipate in the short term a positive impact of the free trade zone. They are supporting the project, they are supporting the initiative, but they don't expect a positive return in the very short term. So this is not, we don't think this is something that has influenced their level of confidence in the 2022 business.
That's not encouraging, though, I have to say. We've been talking a lot about the continent. I mean, if I've interviewed anyone here, you should know I always talk about the Continental Free Trade Area, because we're hoping that that's going to be the big game changer in intra-Africa trade. And if it's the big game changer in intra-Africa trade, it means more growth. It means businesses have more opportunities cross-border.
It will take time. It will certainly be, but for the time being, in the short term, they don't expect any positive aspect from that.
Okay, so let's take that policy away, and let's say the big push to try and industrialize Africa, which, by the way, African CEOs and policymakers, we've been talking about this since forever and a day. Do they believe that now is the time that actually we can execute on industrializing the continent, that we are making headway?
I don't know. This is not something we've measured, so I wouldn't be able to give you a precise answer on that question.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, though, because I think that so many people are focusing on, you know, value-add processing plants. So I wonder how that trend is. Maybe you should think about adding that question in for next year. I'm giving you ideas.
We already have 35 questions, so it takes time, but we may add some. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
we're changing the questions every year, so we're adding new questions, and yeah, it's a moving target.
Yeah, and so tell me, are the CEOs generally feeling optimistic? I mean, do you get the sense, to be honest, I haven't met a successful CEO that's ever doom and gloom and a naysayer, but are CEOs feeling that they are able to face head on the risks that are on the horizon and that they're overly optimistic about the future?
Yes, they are, but at the same time, they are very cautious in their projections because they know that their risk profile is increasing on certain aspects. I was mentioning the security risk, for example, the cyber risk, and again, the potential consequences of the war in Europe with the rate of inflation that is constantly increasing, and there could be a transportation to Africa.
Fascinating. Okay, Emmanuel, and then last question for you. As we look to the future, and I think, this event has been fantastic where we've been able to meet and see each other for the first time in many years. How can this survey be used as a barometer or a sort of, reference point for the CEOs, for the business people, for the budding entrepreneurs that are at the conference that can get access to this report?
Well, the comprehensive version of the study, of the barometer, has been released yesterday before the press conference. So it's available for CEOs, and we are available for any question they may have going through the document. But it's really worth reading because it's very rich, very dense, and there are a lot of information that I think are very relevant when it comes to making decisions, planning investments, and so I think it can be very useful for CEOs. It's not only for the public at large, but it is also for CEOs.
Fantastic, Emmanuel. Thank you so much. It's really good to see you, and hopefully we have more good news next year when we do the CEO survey again. Yeah?
Thank you, Annie. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Round of applause, please, for Emmanuel. Much appreciated.